Thank you very much, and now in English. We're here today because Justin Trudeau personally intervened to give a $500 million grant to a group that had paid his family a $500,000. In fact, only a few months before he was approving this $500 million grant to this group, the group was treating his wife to a lavish trip to London, England, presumably covering her expenses, according to testimony we heard from the Kielburgers. This group was pouring benefits into the Trudeau family, so many benefits that when we asked the Kielburgers, how much did you pay the Trudeaus, it took them about 5 minutes to add it all up. 20,000 for this, 30,000 for that, 50,000 for a third thing, and Trudeau had no problem returning the favor by paying them back a $500 million grant for a program that already existed in-house for over 20 years. But Trudeau's defense is that he had no role in it. He didn't do anything. It was some mid-level bureaucrat that just rammed it all down his throat. She concocted this idea to contract out a program that had long existed within her own department to a third-party group that just happened to pay the Prime Minister's family a $500,000. And then it dropped on his cabinet desk the day of the decision, and he was so surprised and outraged that he pushed back and made them wait another week before they could get approval and the money. Only one problem. The documents came out. And they showed that, in fact, it wasn't a mid-level bureaucrat concocting the scheme. It was senior advisors to the Prime Minister himself, his top officials with whom he meets daily. Rick Theis, for example, is involved in email correspondence setting up programs with the Wee brothers. Ben Chin gets an email from the Wee brothers saying, "Thank you, Ben, for helping to shape our program with the government." So apparently it was shaped by the Prime Minister's top advisors and not, as the Prime Minister falsely claimed, by some mid-level bureaucrat in the employment department. So we said, well, let's bring these advisors in and see what they have to say. His response, no, ministerial responsibility. Only ministers should testify, says he, about the conduct of staff in their offices. Well, who's the minister responsible for staff in the PMO? Well, wouldn't you know? The Prime Minister himself. So we have a deal. We will accept a compromise. If Trudeau's staffers can't testify, then he can. We ask him to testify for no less than 4 hours before the Ethics Committee in person. He has shown his willingness to attend events in person whenever it's a photo op or an announcement, so he obviously feels safe doing that, and we welcome him to do so in person. And in that 4-hour testimony, he can answer why his staff were engaged in this long string of correspondence with the Wee brothers about setting up programs and grants of taxpayer money. At the same time as the Wee brothers were circulating documents within Trudeau's office, highlighting his mother and his spouse. At the same time, or just weeks after his spouse accepted lavish travel from the Wee brothers. So, the Prime Minister wants ministerial responsibility. There's only one person who can give it to us. Him. So we'll see you at Ethics Committee, Justin. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. Pleasure to join you today with my colleague, the Honourable Pierre Poilievre, to discuss the ongoing cover-ups of the scandals that are plaguing our government. Justin Trudeau and his government have undertaken a coordinated cover-up of the Wee scandal. As Pierre outlined, this is a situation where the Prime Minister's family benefited a $500,000, and in exchange for that benefit, that organization was given a $500 million agreement with their same government. And at the same time, we see the Trudeau government covering up the sexual misconduct allegations against the former chief of the defense staff. Now, the pattern is the same in both. At first, Prime Minister Trudeau says he has no idea about the details, or in the case of the Wee scandal, his family wasn't paid. That was the original story. And then later, as the truth comes out, as documents come to light, as opposition politicians fight for answers for Canadians, in that case about how $500 million of their money was to be given to an organization with these direct ties to the Prime Minister, the story changed. In the case of the sexual misconduct allegations, the Prime Minister originally said he first heard of this when the reporting started weeks ago. But now, of course, we know that not only did the Minister of National Defence know about these allegations and refuse to act, the Prime Minister's office was also aware. The Minister of National Defence had said at committee that when it was revealed the Chief of Defence Staff, after allegations were made about sexual misconduct, that he was then given a sizable raise, the minister said he had no part, no role, no input in that process. Well, Friday, testimony at the Defence Committee proved otherwise. That in fact, the minister is part of that process, and that in fact, his testimony at committee was not truthful. Canadians deserve accountability from their government. They deserve accountability on how their money is spent. $500 million when it's allocated to a group that has paid members of the Prime Minister's family and benefited them nearly $500,000. Canadians deserve answers. When parliamentarians investigated this initially last summer, the Prime Minister had his government illegally redact documents. Then he prorogued Parliament, shutting down all of the committee's works. When committees resumed, many hours of filibusters ensued. It took the summoning of witnesses, a very rare step for parliamentary committees to exercise that power, to get witnesses to come. And when the witnesses finally did come, Mark and Craig Kielburger, they revealed further contradictions with the testimony that the Prime Minister, his ministers, and staff had given. So after filibusters at multiple committees, after Parliament was shut down, after documents were illegally redacted, members of Parliament are looking for answers. They're looking to provide the truth and transparency to Canadians. We were promised in 2015, when Justin Trudeau ran, that we would have accountability, we would have transparency, and that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Well, it's not sunlight blinding Justin Trudeau. He's blinded by his ambition and seeking to protect the corruption and the scandals in his own government. And he's going to great lengths to ensure that they remain hidden from Canadians. On Thursday of last week, members of Parliament laid out the case in the House to have witnesses testify at committee with key information about these issues. Zita Astravas to the Defence Committee, Ben Chin, Rick Tice, and Amit Pal Singh at the Ethics Committee, as well as a due diligence report, should one exist, from the Privy Council office to be tabled with the Ethics Committee. All eminently reasonable requests by the opposition that were met with filibusters at committee. So when the House voted with a strong majority for those witnesses to appear at committee, we heard from the government House leader that they would instruct staff to defy the will of Parliament, to defy the will of Canadians. Well, as Pierre said, we have a solution, and it's built in to our discussions that we had in the House on Thursday, and it allows for the Prime Minister to be accountable, to be transparent, to provide the truth to Canadians. Because to this point, that's not what we've seen. from his government. So tomorrow at 2 o'clock, there is an opportunity for the Prime Minister to appear at committee and to lay these issues to rest, to give the truth to Canadians. That's what we're here to get. Thank you very much. We'll take your questions.
We'll now start the question period. Nous allons maintenant commencer la période de questions. As usual, one question, one follow-up. Comme d'habitude, une question et une question suivie. Operator, could we have the first question, please?
Thank you. Please press star 1 if you have a question. N'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. The first question, la première question, is from Libertium of the Canadian Press. Please proceed. Your line is open.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to just a little bit of point of clarification. You talked about 2 p.m. He could appear at committee. I assume that's ethics committee. And my question, my actual question is, given that your motion laid out that he could come, and basically asked the Prime Minister to appear for 3 hours, what can you do if he doesn't appear? What fallback options do you have, either to force him to appear or take other action?
Well, of course, we expect that either the staff or the Prime Minister will appear. It's incumbent on them to do it. It's an order of the House, and it's the will of Canada's Parliament that he do appear. And so we first expect that will happen. There are a number of measures available to committees and to the House if people don't follow if they don't follow the instructions that are laid out. But it's a simple matter of accountability. So the reason for the Prime Minister not to appear would only serve to further one narrative, and that's that they are in fact hiding something. And so if the Prime Minister has nothing to hide, then he has no reason to fear coming to committee, answering the questions that members will put to him, and then we can put these issues to rest. But we won't presuppose the Prime Minister's decision, because we do expect that he will be there, and we look forward to seeing him tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
I would just point out, I think the question is it's an interesting one, but it is not, in this case, applicable because the Prime Minister's he's asked to testify. He said that he believes the Minister should testify, not the staff. He's the Minister. So we're just giving the Prime Minister what he's asked for. He asked to testify and take ownership for what went on in his office. We couldn't agree more, and so I think we have a consensus.
And maybe this was, I have to admit, I haven't looked at the original motion, whether with regards to the Zita Stravis and Mr. Chin and Rick Tice, were those summons? And if they weren't, why not issue a summons? Why not have a committee issue a summons to these various political assistants or political aides?
Well, again, it's extraordinary for a committee to issue a summons. Canadians are usually quite responsive to the invitations for parliamentary committees that they do appear. However, in this case, it's not a committee, strictly a committee invitation. It's an order of the House of Commons. So we're going to follow the proper sequence. But it's also important to note that the motion was originally put forward to summon these, or to invite these witnesses, excuse me, and the Liberals filibustered it. We've heard an awful lot lately about from the government, from the Prime Minister, the government House Leader, that the opposition is getting in the way of the government's agenda. It would be interesting to see an accounting of how many hours and at how many committees Liberal members have filibustered the committees: Ethics, Finance, Procedure and House Affairs, National Defence, amongst others. So the opposition, when presented with another filibuster, moved the issue expeditiously to the House. So we had to use one of our supply days to allow the government to advance its own legislation when we return from the break. We're not taking up committee time that the Liberal members have devoted to filibusters. We're looking to have these meetings, and these meetings are scheduled during the weeks where members are usually in their constituencies. So we're giving the government a gift in allowing to move forward with this without interfering with their legislative agenda. And so we're going to follow the proper process. And so in this case, summons won't need to be issued because, as my colleague Pierre Poilievre said, the Prime Minister and his government House Leader has said that they will follow the concept of ministerial accountability in an absolute way, and in that way, we'll welcome the Prime Minister to testify in place of his staff.
Opératrice, prochaine question.
Merci. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. Please press star 1 if you have any question. The next question, la question suivante, is from Brian Lilly. Please mention your media before asking your question. Your line is now open.
Brian Lilly with Toronto Sun. Given the lengths that the government has gone to, you mentioned some of them, proroguing the House, filibustering, all of these things, how far do you expect them to go with this? And if they do appear, what do you expect? You're obviously looking for something specifically.
Well, Brian, thank you for the question. I don't know why they could object. We've given them what they wanted. Trudeau said a minister should testify whenever his staff's conduct is in question. In this case, there's two staffers in the PMO who did correspondence with the Wee brothers setting up this $500 million grant. Trudeau says they can't testify because they're just staff members. The minister should always be responsible for explaining their conduct. He's the minister, so we're inviting him. We're giving the Prime Minister a 4-hour platform in which he can answer questions about his involvement in this grant and explain away the obvious contradictions from his earlier testimony that we have now in writing. So I think we have a happy, nonpartisan agreement that should garner his immediate support. I expect later today you'll be getting a statement from the PMO happily welcoming the invitation and working with the clerk at the committee to schedule the Prime Minister's appearance. You agree with that, Michael?
Absolutely.
You sound more optimistic, or perhaps it's bravado. I'm not sure. They've gone to some pretty long lengths to shut down these attempts. So obviously they're looking to hide or distract or not talk about this. It's just not something they want to get into. In fact, along those lines, Pierre, you saw a tweet from your Liberal opponent the other day that accused you of being a white supremacist for wearing an oil sand shirt. So doesn't all of this just show that they're not going to come out? And, I mean, they're going to throw terms like white supremacy at you. They're going to prorogue Parliament again, perhaps. This is just something they don't want the committee looking into.
Well, you've really asked two questions. I'm sure, back to my earlier point, Trudeau will testify because he said that he wants to. He said he believes in ministerial responsibility over ministerial offices. He's the minister responsible for the PMO, and therefore he must testify if he wants to be consistent with everything that his members have said on the floor of the House of Commons. Now, with regards to the slander that the Liberal Riding Association in Carleton has been forced to take down due to a massive backlash. Temporarily yesterday, I noticed that the Liberal Riding Association had its entire Twitter account shut down. It's possible that I don't know, but maybe it's because they were spreading misinformation that they had their Twitter account shut down. Both Chris Rogers, the twice defeated Liberal candidate from Carleton, who was most recently rejected in 2019, and Justin Trudeau need to apologize to oil sands workers in general and to the Métis man in particular who designed the shirt. But I think it's time that we tackle this head on. It's always wrong to deliberately and dishonestly throw around false accusations of racism. Racism is such an appalling disease of the soul that charges of it must only be directed at people who are truly guilty. So it is wrong all the time. it is doubly wrong to direct such charges at a Métis man who set up an organization specifically to promote Indigenous and immigrant energy workers who have benefited from the energy sector lifting them out of poverty. This is a multicultural group specifically designed to promote diversity and break down barriers and give opportunity to Indigenous and immigrant people, headed up by a Métis man who is a supporter of the sector. It is appalling for the Liberal Party to attack this Métis man in this way. But it is especially appalling for this party to do that because of its leader's own dark and unacceptable history with matters of race. Now, Justin Trudeau, he not only spent much of his early adulthood repeatedly engaging in premeditated acts of racism, of actually spending the time in a premeditated and sober manner to carry out grotesque acts of racism that he only apologized for when he was caught. Now, he says that he's no longer a racist, and I take him at his word. You know, I think it is possible for people to change. But that doesn't explain his conduct in other matters. Take the case of SNC-Lavalin, another scandal. Now, a lot of us have focused on how the Prime Minister illegally interfered in a criminal prosecution. He did. He was found guilty of that as well. But think of the broader context of the SNC-Lavalin scandal. What was it about? This was a multinational run by multimillionaires that had bribed a Libyan dictator and his son with yachts and prostitutes with the purpose of stealing from the Libyan people. Stealing from some of the most poor people in the entire world. And on whose side did Justin Trudeau fall? On the side of the corporate criminals who did that. And it gets worse. When a First Nations woman had the courage to stand up to him and prevent him from interfering in that criminal prosecution, he fired her. And not only did he fire her, then he sent out Liberal bigwigs to attack her using racial undertones in the process. Since that time, minorities from his own caucus have spoken out against the way he has treated them internally. So, frankly, it would be bad enough for Trudeau and his team to be throwing around these awful slurs against other people. But given his own conduct on these matters, he should be especially ashamed. What he should be doing is trying to atone for his own terrible behavior on these matters instead of falsely throwing out allegations at other people. Thank you.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. There are no further questions registered at this time. Il n'y a plus de questions pour le moment. I would now like to return the meeting back over to the room.
This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse.